So I think I'm now sharing my screen.
Yeah.
Hello. Yeah. Sorry, can you hear me okay? Right. So my name's Angela Shapiro, and I'm co-presenting with Brian McDonald. I was a senior lecturer at Glasgow Caledonian University for many years, and I'm still got an honorary position with them. And as well as that, I'm also a member of Gathering the Voices Association. There are 6 of us. We are 3 couples, and the 3 men are second generation, and we are a charity, and we have been going since about 2010. The aim of our project is to gather audio and video testimonies from Holocaust refugees about their experiences before and after they came to Scotland, to make these testimonies available, freely accessible on the World Wide Web, to educate current and future generations about the resilience of these refugees, and to use innovative teaching and learning approaches. Brian, thank you. As well as preparing the games, I actually was based in the School of Engineering, Computing and Built Environment, which is quite amusing because my background is adult education. So my knowledge of all of that is incredibly limited, but it gave me access to students who wouldn't normally engage with learning about the Holocaust. And from the beginning, the 6 of us decided that we wanted very much to collaborate with young people. So this is various projects that we have done. We had design students design the front cover of Saskia Teep's book, Surviving Brigitte's Secrets. And we also had a group of different students from product design, interior design, and graphic design who came up with ideas for our traveling exhibition. And so these are 3 of the ideas that they came up with. My favorite one, which was commented by Stephen Anson, who's attending the talk, was one which was made out of cardboard, which would disintegrate if water went on it. And he asked what happened when cleaners went near the exhibition, and they said happily it would just disintegrate. This group here is actually from the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland, and they did a happening with primary school pupils who were all immigrants to Glasgow. All of them, English was second language, and they presented their presentation to some of our interviewees. One of the things I should also say is that we know all of our interviewees. We have over 50 testimonies on our website, and we know all the interviewees extremely well because we've known them over a number of years. Next slide.
So my name's Brian McDonald. I'm head of games at University, but I used to work with Angela in Glasgow Caledonian, and obviously when Angela was getting other departments in the university involved in working with Gathering the Voices, Angela immediately approached me, and we tried to figure out how games could get involved, because that's where my area was, and we decided that a game jam would be a perfect place to explore these stories and see what games we could make from these stories of the refugees to Scotland, because it's a very unique experience, and also that experience of capturing a refugee coming into Scotland and all the differences, all the cultural kind of misunderstandings, etc., could make for interesting games. So we decided to make this a game jam, and a game jam is exactly what it sounds like. It's an event, very much how musicians come together and jam a musical piece out. It's the same for games. So developers, designers, and others, artists, all come together and make a game under a constrained period of time. And essentially that constrained period of time and the other constraints that happen in the jam where you're meeting new people lead to very interesting creative solutions to certain problems. So what we did was we hosted this 48-hour event using prompts from the Gathering Voice website as sort of starting points for a lot of the games that could be made. So there was many teams over the weekend that took part, and one of these games, Arrival, was taken forward, and a larger prototype was made. And this prototype is based on one of the stories George Taylor, and it also incorporated images and stories from the website. This was a slightly fictionalized case version of the events, but the main points came from that sort of story. So this was created for the iPad, and it was kind of like an interactive fiction sort of style, where you get some choices and you've got some actions you have to complete before you kind of complete the game and meet your family who have kind of escaped to Scotland before you arrived. And this is specifically around the experience of coming to Glasgow, which with its interesting cultural aspects as well. And from that experience of the game jam and working with Gathering the Voices, we kind of came up with some recommendations that if you ever think about doing a game jam on some of your sort of exhibits or your stories, here's a few things that I would sort of recommend, and we recommend from our experiences. You should definitely select a single theme or prompt. Don't leave it open, because the interesting thing about game jams is it's the constraints that these give make for a more challenging environment and allow the participants to slightly push against it and come up with really interesting ideas. Have a talk to frame the game jam. Don't just give them the resources. Have someone come in and set the tone, guide the jammers, guide what they're trying to do. Subject experts should also come in and possibly be part of the creation experience. So embed them in the teams if possible and become part of the jam. Also, you should think about ways of collecting the games that are made. So one of the things that we had an issue with was trying to collect all the different games that were made. And it was very much based on the personal relationship between me and the various jammers. So there's a website called itch.io, which is used to host and run game jams. It's a perfect platform for that. And then the last thing that I would mention is have some funding available so you can take one or more of the games forward and make a fuller prototype, because the thing to recognize about a game jam is 48 hours or shorter even. And it doesn't necessarily make for a solid game that you could take to market or take out there into an exhibit. So be ready to have some funding available for a team to take their game forward into a larger prototype. And here's some images from the jam. I think Angela might want to point out a few kind of key things from here.
Which I love the photograph on the left-hand side, and I feel that is what Gathering the Voices is about. We have a photograph here showing the late Professor John Subak Sharp, who founded the Department of Virology in Glasgow University, talking to a graduate student who was talking about his serious game idea. And beside him, we have two children looking at an interview online, which is with their grandmother, Dorit Sim, and they're looking at it on the computer. So, and on the right-hand side, on the Sunday, the last day of the game, we invited the interviewees to come with their families, and over 100 people attended. And like the previous speakers were saying, they were nervous about the idea of games being used, and they were absolutely really impressed. And as well as that, we had representatives from political area as well in Scotland, from the Scottish Parliament, and we also had from the German embassy as well. So it was a great turnout.
And then from that sort of experience, we decided to start embedding some of the stories into one of our serious games modules at Glasgow Caledonian. This is run by my colleague David Moffat. And what he does in that module is he asks the students to consider how games and games technology more broadly can be used for other purposes than entertainment. So if you don't know what serious games are, it's slight contention about the terminology, but essentially it's a game that is has more than just an entertainment value. There's a message behind it, an educational benefit, a health benefit, so on and so forth. So what David did is he used the sort of prompts from Gathering the Voices as a way of triggering the students on to do some research. And what was interesting for us is the students involved in the projects actually learned themselves a lot more about the Holocaust and the stories of the survivors of the Holocaust. So it was an educational moment for the developers and the students in general. And you can see an image here of one of the games. I'll show you a quick GIF of it a second. But you can see the team of students there, along with Marion. So that's the game behind Marion is actually of her story, and they're the students who have actually worked on it. So it was a true collaboration. And members of the Gathering Voices project were involved in briefing and giving feedback to the students, and they were intimately involved in the development of that sort of collaboration. And here's an example of Marion's game. It used the real testimony and the real sort of narrative that came from her experiences of surviving the Holocaust. And to a certain extent, you were put in the shoes of Marion and you had to decide what she would do. And there was some action element games that were representations of some of the stories as well. So it wasn't all just a story-driven game, there was action elements. So from all this, there's a few little reflections that we're going to kind of talk about. So there is an interest in making games, and obviously this sort of panel session is all about that, and the previous speakers show that, but there are issues that we should all address and be mindful of, because even though we know that games are a powerful medium to tell stories, to engage people in history and other elements, we need to realize there are issues. There's the cost of development, testing and deployment, long-term support, and perceptions of the games, which we've already touched on. So one of the things to mention is the cost of development is something that people are not aware of more generally. So this kind of really does hit projects that get arts funding or from other sort of research councils and various other things. There's usually not a lot of money left to create games. So the sort of money that you get is used to create resources. So games are not a replacement for a website because they're a lot more expensive, and you have to realize that games themselves are expensive pieces of entertainment that take a long time to develop. And there's a couple of articles that I want to just highlight, like the indie creators talking about how much it costs to fund their own games. Then I'm just going to pass to Angela to talk about the deployment aspects of games.
We tested the games among 3 schools. We chose the primary school, which we had worked with the conservatoire, and again, over 50 languages are spoken at that school. And we also went to the largest secondary school in Glasgow, which has again got a high number of immigrants, and also a school for people with additional support needs. The pupils all thoroughly enjoyed playing the games, and they all said, actually, which they didn't really know very much about the Holocaust. Sadly, those that did know a bit about the Holocaust, it was the only one aspect of the Holocaust, which was about the camps, and they didn't really have an understanding that how it affected so many people and at such a young age, because a lot of the people we've interviewed came over on the kinder transport. So they were really amazed that Marion, for example, went through all of this at the age of 6. But we did have issues with access to computers in classrooms, IT issues among staff that weren't very confident about the playing of the games, and lack of expertise, and how to get it onto the general intranet as well in different schools. And also, one of the things which we should always remember as well is that poorer pupils don't have so much access to computer and tablets, which, as we all know, is a huge problem now in COVID-19. Can I just remind you as well that we did this all in 2014. So, this is very much kind of going back quite a few years. Thanks, Brian.
And that point about doing it in 2014 is an interesting one, because a lot of the technology we used is now obsolete, and to a certain extent, that's what, 6 years, 5 to 6 years, and then these games are not usable anymore to a certain extent. So there's a maintenance and obsolescence of technology. So technology which was quite ubiquitous, such as Flash and Unity Web plugin, are now no longer usable on the web. So one of the things you always need to consider is that even though games are an impactful medium. They are still a digital medium, which has an issue with long-term support and obsolescence. And larger issues like this are being addressed by colleagues in the area of digital preservation. There is a lot of work and research in that space to kind of bring these technologies that disappear back to life, but bear in mind that that is a problem. And one of the things that I'm loving about the discourse right now that we're having here is how we all feel that games have an impactful sort of role in telling these stories, but that's not the wider perception in the world. Games are still seen as a frivolous activity, even though games have been through, they've been here since the dawn of man, and it's how we actually learn and various other things. But there's a couple of games that I like to highlight, to kind of commercial games that show that games can tell more powerful stories if you give them a chance. So there's two examples here. This War of Mine, which is a game about being a refugee in a war zone. It's a commercial game made by, I believe, developers in Poland, 18-bit games, and they decided to give some of their profits to War Child as well. Then there's Atent Tat 1942, which is a game set in the former Czechoslovakia, and it's about the survivors of the sort of Nazi rule there after the assassination of Reinhard Heydrich. And you play as a grandchild of one of the survivors, finding more about the stories of the people involved, including your own grandmother. So it shows that conversation that we're all talking about right now.
So we are, I think, despite the fact we are a very small charity with very limited funding, we are constantly doing innovative aspects of learning and teaching. And we are now involved again with Glasgow Caledonian University, and we are now in the process of developing a comic with Magic Torch Comics. And this is one of their examples of working with asylum seekers who have come to Scotland. And they've won awards for various comics. In fact, one of their more recent awards was for their portrayal of the First World War. And so they are now producing a comic which is going to be based on Gathering the Voices Association. So that's coming out, we hope, around about March or April. That will be available digital. And also we hope that it will go around all the schools in Scotland as well. So we're always looking to engage new ideas. And the final slide, perhaps Brian, do you want to explain exactly what?
Yeah, so Glasgow Caledonian had a team of students who went onto a programme called Transfusor, which is all about funding the new talent in the UK games industry. And they created a game called Hotel Arcanum, which is about the transgenerational impact of the Holocaust. It's 3 developers from all over Europe who studied in Glasgow in Scotland and have received 25k worth of funding, and are now building this game to be a larger release. But they're also hitting that problem of funding that I talked about, and being a digital platform and how to get it out there. So it's an interesting project, and it shows that there's still, a will to explore this area and communicate these stories in a digital format like games.
And again, they are students from Glasgow Caledonian University. So even though I've retired, I'm still involved, as I said, with the university. They're still continuing to engage with aspects of Gathering the Voices, which is truly wonderful. One of the people before talked about the importance, which I think is important, of working with people who wouldn't normally learn about the Holocaust. And so from the beginning with Glasgow Caledonian University students, I did make a point of engaging with students who wouldn't normally learn about the Holocaust, except when they were at school. There's a very, very big programs go on throughout Scotland, throughout school. And so I think it's actually been a positive aspect from the students that have got involved, and definitely from the Gathering of Voice Association, and definitely also from the interviewees as well. They enjoyed meeting younger people and exchanging information. And I think despite the fact that the game, sadly, at the moment, 2 games aren't able to be used, they were, I think, would you agree, Brian, a successful project?
Yes, I think in many ways it's a successful project. And I think just the lessons we learned from it were, you know, worth going through that process. And I think the shame is that the games are no longer usable. So I am working to update the rival, certainly to port it towards Unity and put it on more modern platforms. But it's a slow process recreating it. So that's one of the challenges that we have, is you need to constantly keep these going. And keep them updated.